I'm aiming to talk for around 40 minutes today, which will leave some time at the end to discuss any answers to questions that came up during the webinar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get underway. This is a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today. I just want to say a little bit about the broader picture of the UK data service so that you know where qualitative and mixed data kind of fit within the bigger picture. I'll give some examples and details of some of our best qualitative and mixed data collections, and I'll try to show how they've been used in some quite creative ways. I'll also cover how to find and access data, and particularly qualitative and mixed data, and I'll close with some tips and resources and places you can go for further help. Do be aware that we've got webinars and lots of materials that go into much further detail on things like finding and accessing data. So this is just a quick overview that's focusing on the data itself, but we found that some people who want that kind of information also want a little bit of supplementary information as well. So that's what we're trying to do here. So what is the UK Data Service? We are a comprehensive resource funded by the ESRC. Our main job is to be a single point of access to a wide range of secondary social science data. The main purpose then is the collection, ingest, and processing of data and further dissemination of that data for people to use. In addition to that data infrastructure core, we also have a service layer which provides extensive support, training, and guidance. Who is it for? Well, we like to think it's really for anyone who has an interest in data. Traditionally, our main audience, and the people who probably both deposit and use our data the most, tend to be academic researchers and students. A lot of other people are well represented as well, including government analysts, charities, foundations, businesses, research centers, think tanks, all give us and use our data. Given the importance of data, how it's used, how it's disseminated, we are trying to reach out and support a wide range of communities. Here's the front page to our website, which some of you may have already seen. There's the top half of the page to give you a flavor of what we do. The link to the main page is below, and I'll show you where to find specific things around qualitative and mixed data a little bit later. I just want to point out as well that our website is going through a little bit of a revamp. We're not removing any of the information I'm going to show you today, but some of the navigation around the web page might change a bit when we release the new website. That change will likely happen in the coming weeks, so don't worry if when you next go to the website it looks a little bit different. It's really just a facelift to make it look hopefully a little bit easier to find things. What kind of data do we hold? Well, this session is specifically about qualitative and mixed, but just so you know, the majority of the data, at least judging by the number of collections, is quantitative data. So we hold well over 6,000 collections, of which 5,000 of them are quantitative collections. And we hold a wide variety of that data. So we've got survey data, both cross-sectional and longitudinal. We have aggregate statistics, domestic and international macro data, census data, so it's aggregate from 71 to 2011, and microdata for those select years that are listed here. But again, today we're focusing on the qual and mixed. And where does it come from? Well, again, that varies depending on the data type, and some of those sources that you see here, especially agencies and statistical time series, those are clearly the main sources for our quantitative data. Most of the qualitative and mixed data comes through individual academics, many of which were funded by research grants, often funded by the ESRC, but not exclusively. We certainly take data from other funders like the Wellcome Trust, Leverhulme, others, sometimes independently funded work. And also, of course, for some of the qualitative, originally paper-based materials, we hold public records, historical sources, and things like the census. So where you want, if you wanted to have a way of finding key qualitative data quite easily through the website, there are a couple paths to it. So on the right-hand side of the screen, there's just a snippet of what our homepage looks like, and you can see there's a section which outlines different types of data. And one of those areas is qualitative and mixed. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to another page, which is the key data for qualitative and mixed data. If you come to the website through a different route and you don't arrive at the home page, you can still navigate to this page using the menu at the top. So this is the same menu for all the pages. So you would just click, key data, and then in the left hand, you would select qualitative and mixed methods. And the key data is listed on this page. It's just a collection about 10 or so data sets, which are things that we know are very well used and things that have a very high quality, that are easily accessible, and more generally just a really good introduction to the range of data that we hold at the archive. So let me tell you about some of the other collections which might not be listed under that page. These collections are fairly new deposits and demonstrate the kind of things that we have coming in. So the first study demonstrates the quality and capacity in inclusive research with people with learning disabilities. It's a focus group-based research. Some of the focus groups are with people who have learning disabilities, and some of the focus groups are with researchers who they themselves have learning disabilities and are doing research on learning disabilities. So it's very much in the spirit of active research, of participatory research, and of course, a good example of focus group research. Just to note here as well, data reuse is a great way to access certain populations which would normally be difficult to access, whether that's because they're physically difficult to access, so for example, like prisoners, or in the case of disability, sometimes it just requires further resources to appropriately safeguard and address the needs of that group, and that may pose funding or possibly ethical challenges. The second item here, Intergenerational Dynamics, is by Jennifer Mason, and it looks at whether people above the age of 50 consider themselves to be a generation, and whether or not they identify as a generation in contrast to other age groups, primarily younger age groups, or do they identify themselves differently than that? She's done a great deal of work on these sorts of aging and generational dynamics, and this is interview-based data, again, very high quality data. The next one is Chronic Illness and Online Networking, Expectations, Assumptions, and Everyday Realities. This is research on diabetes and the use of Facebook. So just to point out, this particular one, we don't have a lot of data of what we're calling like the kind of new and novel forms of data, like big data, social media, those sorts of things, but we are getting some. And this is an example of someone who's been using Facebook contacts in order to study how people with diabetes form support groups and how they get information. So it's quite creative, and it's a different kind of data from the usual interview-based research. The fourth one down is the Coalitional Presidentialism in Comparative Perspective, Minority Executives in Multi-Party Systems. This one's quite a mouthful. Not quite as accessible as the others, but I just want to make the point with this one that you don't just get individual-based data in qualitative and mixed data. So this study looks at presidential coalitions across a number of countries. So this is across Europe, Africa, and Asia. And it makes the point again that even with qualitative research, you can do more macro scale kind of comparative work. And this kind of study is a really good example of that. The last one, Family Life and Work Experience Before 1918, is the founding collection for our qualitative part of the archive. So this one is not a new edition, but I would be amiss if I didn't mention it. It's comprised of over 400 oral history interviews, and it's considered to be the first oral history project of Britain. It's very well used, so I don't really need to promote it as such, but I just wanted to signpost to it as the typical type of collection that many people probably think of with qualitative data. Maybe not this large, but these are people born during the Edwardian era, and some of these interviews are absolutely massive. They're very long, and they cover all aspects of people's lives. It's an incredibly rich collection. So what I'm going to do now is give a quick whirlwind tour of the three collections that we hold and just tell you a little bit more about what they've done and how they've been used. So the first is Last Refuge. I've put in the SN, which might seem a little, esoteric to you if you're new to the UK data service, but all of our collections have a study number that's associated with it. It's a unique identifier for that particular collection. So you can find our collections through a number of tools, but if you happen to run across, a study number, that's a really quick way to find the collection. So it's really useful to know about. The Last Refuge was conducted by Peter Townsend and is a major investigation of long-stay institutional care for old people in Britain in the late 1950s. And again, a bit like family life and work experience before 1918, this study was really exceptional for its breadth and its range given the time that it was done. The collection has in-depth interviews with 67 local authority chief welfare officers and with serving staff and residents of 173 institutions. It's also an important collection because of the diversity of content. So it wasn't just interviews, there's also photographs, field notes, and diaries. I think there's, that another feature that's quite important about this collection is that the diaries are recorded by both members of staff and residents of the institution. So I think it's one of the few examples where there are actual voices of residents of long-stay institutions. And at the bottom of the page, there's a link to get you to that collection. So again, you can see the richness of some of the images that are available with this data collection, which really help you to visualize more of the context of the collection. And the reason that this collection is so influential is twofold. So one is that it was a pioneering use of qualitative data in the area of old age, retirement, isolation services, and so forth. Some quantitative work had been done, but really the use of qualitative data for this kind of direct policy relevance was new with Townsend's work. And the second reason was that this study had major policy implications because Townsend's results challenged whether long-stay institutions were really the best place for the elderly. And I think part of the conclusion of this book that he's written is that for many elderly, in some circumstances, they are not the right form of institution. And it also had a lot of practical implications in that he recognized that people needed not just criticism, but also suggestions. And he came up with some recommended improvements that institutions could adopt. The next study I will tell you a little bit about is the school leavers study. And in this case, the original data were collected in about 1978 by a researcher named Ray Paul. And this was work done with students on the Isle of Sheppey. So Sheppey is an island off the east part of the UK. For those of you who don't know the geography of the UK, Ray Paul had spent a long time studying many aspects of living and working on the Isle of Sheppey, including, topics like employment, education, religion, and family. So really just a huge range of issues. Somewhere in that process, he got quite interested in schools and the educational experience. So what he found out about was a situation where teachers at one of the comprehensive schools were asked to set a particular kind of essay to pupils just before they were due to leave school, so roughly about 16 years old. And I think this is actually, in some ways a difficult kind of essay. They were asked to imagine that they were nearing the end of their life and that something had made them think back to the time that they left school. They then had to write an imaginary account of how their life played out after leaving school at 16 and the 30 or 40 years thereafter. Despite being, a somewhat difficult exercise to engage in, the students did an impressive job of providing details which allowed a quick glimpse into their aspirations, their expectations, and the realities of their lives to come. So what we got as a result of that exercise is 141 of these essays, 89 boys and 52 girls. And you can see very briefly, and there's a lot more to be done with these essays, but I'm just highlighting a few key points here, is some themes of realism, possibly pessimism, definitely realism though. Young people talked about mundane but stable and grounded jobs. They imagined a very gradual career progression if they progressed at all. There were stories of stagnation, unemployment, and somewhat morbidly, some predicted their own early deaths or deaths of their loved ones. And some of the quotes give you a flavor of the kind of tone of these essays. Again, not all of the essays, but strong themes throughout the data set. So as I said, it's very realistic, very down to earth kinds of commentary. For example, you have the boy who says, "It was hard finding a job. I failed a few chances, but eventually got what I wanted locally." Or the boy who said, "I was on the dole for 6 months after leaving school until I got a job in a garage." Or the girl on the bottom, "I loved for something exciting and challenging, but yet again, I had to settle for second best. I began working in a large clothes factory." So what's quite interesting is that contemporary researchers, Graham Crowe and Don Lyon, went in about 2010 and tried another similar exercise. It wasn't a strict replication, since Paul more or less stumbled across the assignment that teachers had set, so there wasn't as much control over how the essay was put to students, but it was still a really useful restudy. So there's now a new collection of data, which offers a comparative to the present day. So like the first collection, it asks school leavers on Sheppey to imagine their lives, and we get a very different story. So for Sheppey's young people in about 2010, we hear radically different themes. So again, a similar sort of sample size, 110 essays here, a bit more evenly split between boys and girls, and generally the themes that arose from the present day Sheppey students included stories about well-paid, instantaneous jobs, including signing a contract for football or singing. There was a lot of choice, but also a lot of uncertainty. And we also clearly see the influence of celebrity culture. Again, you get a feel for the restudy from looking at the quotes and see how young people in 2010 had very different views of the world from young people in the late 1970s. So one boy wrote that he had an amazing band and toured the world 3 times and sold 4 million records. Another thought he would own a 3-bedroom luxury villa, a helicopter, and a Bentley. Finally, the girl at the bottom who wanted to be anything from a dancer to a hairdresser to a horse rider, and if a dancer, her dream would be to dance for Beyonce or someone really famous. So quite a shift in possibilities for young people today. In terms of the impact of this particular study, it's quite different from the Last Refuge. So as part of the restudy, Graham Crowe and Don Lyon engaged with the community on the Isle of Sheppey and actively sought to involve them in the process of data creation and analysis. As part of this initiative, they created the Living and Working on the Isle of Sheppey website, where they have an archive so that community members can see the original study, as well as see what's been added as part of the restudy. And it's given their community, a bit of a written and an oral history, while also engaging them and exploring their community from different perspectives. So they also have videos, art galleries, and audio, so people can really experience the lived memory of their community. So finally, for the third study that I'll look at, this one is actually a very well-known mixed method study called the National Child Development Survey. It follows the lives of over 17,000 people born in the same week of 1958. At this point, these people are surveyed every several years. So far, participants have been surveyed 9 times since the initial contact in 1958, and the next wave will be coming up in another few years again. The first survey was done starting when participants were just 7 years old. By this point, the information collected is absolutely, comprehensive. So it includes information about their physical development and education, their economic circumstances of their parents and family, the employment, their own health and well-being, their social participation. So it's, absolutely sweeping in terms of what's been covered here. So simply from the standpoint of quantitative data, this is very good. But what makes it even better is that there is a qualitative addition to this fantastic collection, which allows for very rich mixed methods to be done. So in 1969, when the kids were aged 11, they were given an interesting essay, and it's very similar to the school leavers essay, but a little bit different. So they were asked to imagine that they were 25. And in some cases, this is, perhaps a little bit more of a realistic experience in that they only had to project about 15 years ahead. Maybe difficult at 11 years old. In the end, they ended up getting 500 essays. So of course, what's very valuable about this collection is twofold. One is that the sample size is large, particularly for a qualitative collection. And the second is that you have the quantitative data to compare what actually happened to them at age 25. So not only can you look at what they thought would happen, but then you can also look at their lives at age 25 and now also, 45 years old and 55 years old and see how things have unfolded. And a number of articles have been written using this data collection. Jane Elliott, whose publication looking at gender is on this slide, is probably one of the best known people who have used this data set. Okay, so by now, hopefully I've persuaded you to, use some of our QualiMix data, and now you might be wanting to get some of your hands on it. So let me just go through how you can do that. And you can do that by using our data catalog, which is aptly named. The slide goes through how you would conduct a search if you were looking for something which required a filter on a couple different criteria. So when you click the Get Data tab, it'll bring you directly to our data catalog. And on the left-hand menu, you've got a couple of options there for filtering your search. So here I've set a filter for qualitative and mixed methods data, and I've also specified the United Kingdom. And I've picked just a general search term for food. And as you can see, I get 39 collections that come up. Now, the word food could be in the abstract, in the title, in the keywords, or in any of the subjects. So anywhere food might show up on the catalog record, it'll bring it back as a search result. And you can see a couple examples here, consumer trust and traceability, older people's perceptions and experiences of the strengths and vulnerability of the UK's food system. So that's how you would search. There are other types of filters that you can use if you want to be even more specific about the kind of data that's being returned. There's a whole separate, video, webinar and guides available if you need further information on how to find data using our data catalog. We also have a somewhat newer way of searching for qualitative materials specifically, which is QualiBank. And that's an online resource which allows you to search, browse, and cite qualitative materials. You can get to it by clicking QualiBank just below the search bar in the data catalog. So QualiBank allows you to search, browse, and cite the qualitative data. And it really addresses three key issues that arise when reusing qualitative and mixed methods data. And I'll explain these issues more as we go along, but in short, these are finding data, recontextualizing the data, and citing the data. If you want to search using QualiBank, you would use it in the same sort of way as the data catalog. And here I've tried typing typhoid, and you can see, again, like the data catalog, I get back a list of search results. What's different about how QualiBank searches, however, is that it actually searches through the data itself. So if you were looking for qualitative data that specifically has a keyword or a concept in it, you can use QualiBank to sort of search through the data rather than searching just the catalog record. And this is really, a key issue in reusing qualitative data. How do you find the right data for your project? The nature of qualitative data is such that, it's rich, it's in-depth and detailed, and it could potentially answer a lot of different research questions beyond the ones that the original investigators chose. So taking the time to familiarize yourself with data can be quite time-consuming if you're searching for a topic which returns, quite a number of collections. QualiBank helps resolve this by searching through the data itself for you. So hopefully you'll have a better idea of whether or not that data is the right one for your project. Right now, QualiBank has about 20 collections uploaded into its database. However, it's quickly expanding, and you can browse through that data if you know what collection you want to look through, or if you've had certain criteria for a participant's age, gender, their socioeconomic status, or their region, you can refine those characteristics using the left-hand menu. You'll need to hit refine after ticking any of those browsing facets, otherwise the search won't take that facet into account. So just be aware that there is a refine button to hit as well. From that search on typhoid, I then chose to look at the interview with Mrs. Omison. And you can see the interview transcript laid out on the web page, and your search term will be highlighted within that transcript so you can see where it falls and what the context around it is. What's also nice about QualiBank is that it links to external resources, which you can see circled at the top here. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to the bottom of the page after the transcript finishes, and then you can see there's a variety of resources related to that particular interview available, including an audio extract, a book abstract on the Edwardians, images related to the collection, and basic metadata about that participant. So it's a really useful tool to help you contextualize the qualitative data. And this added context, whether it's accompanying audio, expanded discussion on the data from the original investigators, or some other project which reused the data, that just really helps to recontextualize the data. And that added context will help you understand the limitations and the opportunities within the data. And again, QualiBank gives this direct to you through those additional resources. Finally, there is the ability to cite using QualiBank. So we all know how important it is to cite your work properly, and this is no different when you're reusing data. You should cite the data source. QualiBank automatically generates citations for you that you can literally just copy and paste into your work. So you simply click the Create Citation button, which is in the left-hand menu, and then you would highlight with your cursor the portion of the text that you want to cite. You then click Retrieve Citation, and it'll have like a pop-up window that automatically appears with that citation. That citation is very specific though. It directs viewers to the specific passage that you've highlighted. So if someone were to click on the URL or the persistent identifier at the end of that citation, it would bring them specifically to the highlighted section of that transcript. And this addresses kind of a third issue in reusing qualitative data, which is all about evidencing your conclusions. You don't just cite the general collection or even just the transcript, you actually get a much finer grain reference so others can see the quotation in the full context of the interviewer data set. So this really helps to add weight to your conclusions, and it demonstrates transparency in your processes and your analysis. QualiBank is something that we're still expanding on at the archive, and we're still working on support materials to help you use it effectively. So if you have any queries about it, please feel free to get in touch. And this is the citation that would pop up. And you can see at the end there's a URL, which we call a persistent identifier, which brings you to the specific passage. All right, now we'll turn to the final sections of this presentation and just talk a little bit about access and some other tools and resources to help get you started. Data are freely available to anyone who registers with us. Now, we do have material held under different licenses. So for example, you can have open data, which is freely accessible to anyone, but we also hold safeguarded data, which will require you to register. And then we also hold data under more restricted conditions. Any conditions for a data set will be listed on the catalog record, but basically, if you're using the data for non-commercial purposes, the data are free to use once you register with us. And data are available in multiple formats. So for qualitative data, this is usually some sort of text file, but you might also come across some sort of word process document or a PDF. We hold very, very few outputs of qual software packages. And we do also hold some images, some audio, and some video as well. They're not huge collections in the audio and the video, but increasingly we do take those. If you are at a UK university, your own username and password will get you in. If you are not, you'll just need to make an application with us, and assuming you meet the criteria and agree to our terms and conditions, which I'll say a little bit about on the next slide, then you'll be issued with a UK data service specific username and password, which can get you access to the data. And it would probably take me longer to read through this slide and explain registration than it would be to actually do the registration. So the only thing I'm going to point out is when you go through registration, you accept the terms and conditions of our end user license. This is a legal document, and it's about as exciting as any legal document is, but I do want to stress two key points from this document. If you sign up to use the data from the UK data service, you cannot disclose the identity of participants, even if you should incidentally discover who they are. In most cases, you'll probably not be able to uncover identities of participants because the data has been anonymized, but even if you should, you're not permitted to disclose it. And the second key point is that you can't share the data on Word, and that means with anyone. So this would include your research team, your students, anybody. We have quite a lot of resources available for students and researchers, and they can always register separately and download the data set on their own. But yeah, in terms of what you individually can do when you register, you're not to disclose identities or to share the data on Word. And those are the main things to remember about the end user license. Downloading data, again, there's a great short video which walks you through the process. You pick your data, you have to write a short description about what you plan to do with that data, and it's kind of like online shopping, except with data. So you just click the download button, and you can kind of add it to your cart, if you will. The video tutorials are really useful if you've not downloaded data before. So useful tips, particularly for you new users. At the very bottom of our homepage, down near the Contact Us and Legal Bits, we have a link of advice for new users, and it'll take you to guides that we've set up specifically for those who are coming to the service for the first time. We've got all kinds of resources about how to find data with our data catalog, how to register and access the data, what kind of data we hold, and of course there's a listing of more webinars on all kinds of data, including our census data, microdata, longitudinal data, and you can get all of those online. You can also find out how to get in touch with us and how to send a help desk request. We've also got a nice growing collection of video tutorials and how-to guides. Again, off the main menu on the top under Use Data, and then select Video Tutorials in the left-hand menu. There's also a nice quick link to the video tutorials off the main home page. None of this material, again, is going to be deleted when we kind of give our web page a facelift, but the navigation to it may change a little bit. Okay, and we've got some more webinars coming up, which I've listed here. And we've got a few upcoming workshops as well. These are all online workshops, and you can check out our events page for further information and to register for those events. Our events page also has the previous webinars, which are available under past events. So if you're looking for finding data, getting started with secondary data, please look at the other events part of our website. Past events will hold the PowerPoint, other materials, video of the webinar. So, and you can also register there for the upcoming events too. And just a few more resources, I've gone through the support and how-to guides as well as events like workshops. We also have some advice for data management for those who are in the early stages of research or are coordinating large programs, which might involve multi-university collaborations. We're happy to talk to you about your data management requirements, whether you are just a single individual or part of a larger consortium. We're also very eager to hear about what you're doing with our data. So if you've used it in previous publications or in teaching, please get in touch and we can help you publicize that. We can get you featured in one of our case studies, And our case studies look basically at people's experiences of reusing data, whether it was for research, for teaching, or some other use. We'd love to hear your story of reuse. If you have any further questions, please see our help pages and our FAQs. And finally, the usual ways to stay in touch. We've got a contact page. You can sign up for our JISC mail list. You can follow us on Twitter or Facebook. And if you're looking for a recording of this webinar, please check our Twitter. We'll tweet when that video is ready for viewing on our website. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this useful for getting started with your reuse project. We do have some time for questions now. So if you've got any that somebody's asked about the citations, I assume that are generated with the QualiBank. Are they in Harvard system? Good question. I think there is, that is a really good question. I think the default is in Harvard, but I think there is a capacity to switch it between like Harvard and MLA and APA. I think there's, you can kind of tick which one you want, but I think the standard one that they show is in Harvard style. And I know sometimes organizations have like their own special Harvard system that they use where it's slightly more specific to theirs, but I think it's the kind of standard of what elements are appearing in the citation and what order they appear in and that sort of thing, that it uses the basic Harvard style for that. And somebody's asked about accessing data. So can you access it from another country outside of the UK? Yes, you can, wherever you have access to our web pages, you can access it. And you need an affiliation to get access to it. If you have an affiliation, like to a university, you'll just be able to use that username and password to log in. There's just a little bit of an extra step. If you're not affiliated with the university, you'll have to request a username to be able to log in. So you can still access it. It'll just have one extra step of having to request one from us. But it shouldn't take too long. You should get a reply fairly quickly so that you can turn around and get access to the data that you need. And after graduating from a UK university, is it still accessible to alumni? I think that will partly depend on the setup with your university. So some universities, like for example, University of Essex, they have an alumni kind of like login where you can maintain at least some access to the university's resources as an alumni, but not every university will have that kind of setup. If you don't have that affiliation anymore, you will need to request from us a username. So same thing again, just that one extra step of getting a username from us. But yeah, if it depends a little bit on the university itself. Some you'll maintain that access. Some of them you will have to come and ask us for a login. That seems to be all the questions for now that are coming in. Somebody's just asked for a faculty member in another university in another country. Again, just like those who are based in the UK, you can still access our data. So when you go to login, it depends a little bit on what the university login system that they use is. So for example, in the UK, they use the Shibboleth system. So it just depends on what the login system is. They probably, that person can probably use just their normal university login. But if for some reason they're not able to find their university or it's not working, you can always get in touch with us and we can issue you with a username and password. So even if you're in another country, you'll still be able to access our data. A lot of the data, especially now as research is largely, done online, a lot of the data is just downloadable. So you wouldn't need to come into the archive per se to access it. We do have some paper-based collections, but a lot of it now is just digital anyways. So as long as you can register and get that initial access, you can then just download whatever data set that you're interested in. So someone's just asked about downloading for teaching purposes, but it won't allow you to label it as a teaching project. It could be due to the sensitivity of the data. It depends on what. Okay, so someone's asked, they've tried to download a file and they want to use it for teaching purposes, but it's not, there's something funny happening where it's not allowing them to use that file for a teaching project. It could be the sensitivity of the data. You are right there. So depending on the data set itself, some depositors may have specified that they only want it to be used for research purposes. It's a little bit of a more specific condition that is set. It's not a standard one that we would normally use, so it could be something that the depositor has specifically asked for whatever reason. So that could be it. It depends on what the data set is. In the first instance, if you are having trouble accessing the data, you can just get in touch with us and just have the specific, if you can find the study number, that SN number, or just the title of the data set, we can help figure out what's going on there to see if it can be used for teaching purposes, or perhaps there's just something a little bit funny with the data set, and we'll be able to get it to you another way. Yeah, there's not a lot of data sets out there that have specified that you can only use it for research purposes. I know there are some, so it could be that it's one of those, but most just apply what we would consider to be like our standard usage terms. And that does allow for teaching. So it would be a little bit unusual if you can't use it for teaching, but if you can give us the study number and the title, we'll be able to look into that and see if it is one of those with a restriction, or perhaps it's just something that, another box that needs to be ticked, and we can help you through that so that you can download it. All right, it looks like we've dried up on questions here. If you do have something that strikes you later, or when you try and have a go at having a look through some of our data and you stumble across an issue, do just get in touch with us and we'll try and help you out. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming today. I hope it's been useful. And do check out our future webinars and see if any of the others are of interest to you. And also check our events pages for any conferences and that sort of thing. So if you are reusing our data, we do set up conferences for those who are reusing specific types of data sets. So some of those may be of interest as well. And I hope you all have a fantastic week, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at one of our future webinars.